Hello and welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernoff, and I'm trying something new for subscribers here. You'll want to check this out. This is for current subscribers at rhythmchanges.ca and for you if you subscribe now by going to the site. This will go for monthly or annual, so you can choose either one. But for all subscribers en route to episode 100 of this show, which is coming very soon, that's going to be a fun occasion. I want to celebrate it with you. So for all subscribers between now and episode 100 later in August, I will buy you an album on Bandcamp. You will receive it from me, and I will write you a note about why I chose that album for you and why it made me think of you. And you can tell me how close I got or whether I was accurate to your taste or not. But I thought this would be a fun way to celebrate episode 100 of this podcast. So go to rhythmchanges.ca/RCP100, RCP100. And subscribe now if you haven't already, and you will hear from me about this very soon after. Thank you. All right, we're really getting close to episode 100, aren't we? That's pretty fun. We're celebrating that. We're getting out of the Jazz Festival, but we're still doing Jazzfest interview season. This guest is one of the busiest guests coming into a podcast episode that I've ever had. He has so many gigs that I wanted to talk to him about. So this is really wonderful timing that he's here right now. This was such a fun conversation en route through the rest of the summer to episode 100. I'm so stoked. Our guest today is a saxophonist who has had a wild jazz fest playing with so many great people. I had the privilege of catching many of them. They included Faven Kadane's band, Kevin Romain's Salience Network, Taras Luca's band, Kat Torrin and John Korsrud. I would love to talk about all that and more, plus playing in the band Queer as Funk, which has the big annual show at the Commodore coming up on August 2nd. And everything else that he's been up to. So please welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast, John Nicholson.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's so great to finally be on the show.
Thank you for coming to Coquitlam. You know, if you go back to any previous summer episodes, there's a lot of hand wringing off the top about how hot it is. And that's because Vez and I used to live at this place in New West that would be super, super duper hot in the summer. And we would just be dying in my home office recording the episodes. But now we're in Coquitlam. It's nice and cool in here, so we're ready to roll.
It's beautiful here, getting mountain breeze. The sun's out, but we're staying cool.
Yeah, it's great. And we still have the lemonade drinks to get us through it, which was also a classic of
Much appreciated.
So
yes.
That's going great. So cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Okay, so where do I want to begin in terms of the different stops I've heard you at? I think I might want to start actually with the time when you and I played together for the first time, which was before the Jazz Fest. We played in Thomas Holden's band with Chris Fraser and with Todd Stewart alongside Thomas and me and you. So talk about previous times that you've played with, let's say, Thomas and Chris, because I know you've played with both of them before, and talk about that night.
I've definitely played with both of them a great deal. Especially Chris, probably more than any other musician. Chris and I were in the same year at jazz school at Capilano University. So counting all of that, we go back over a decade, and we have played together likely hundreds of times. And
yeah,
Thomas, it would be pretty close to that. He was there at the same time as us in a different year, and he and I went to the master's program at the University of Toronto together, and so we played together a ton there. It was really cool to play in this particular group. I think I got to hear kind of a side of both of those players that I either rarely or haven't heard at all.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of that is thanks to you and Todd as a rhythm section, bringing that out of them. I think you and Chris in particular had a really great dynamic and sort of created a soundscape, like hit a part of the soundscape that I don't get to experience a lot. And I think it brought out different playing in me and in Thomas and in Todd. And it was a really great night. I really enjoyed that show.
Huh. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't really played with Todd much either. That was only like the second time I've ever played with him too. So
Yeah.
that was also an adventure for me. Chris, I've played with several times. I feel like whenever I play with him, it's usually in just like a trio, whether it's with a drummer or I've played with him and with Thomas Holden several times as a trio with no drums at like second floor.
I've heard that trio a number of times. Yeah.
And I feel like Chris always challenges me in an interesting way. Like he knows that I'm looking for something to like jump out on, and he's always kind of throwing me stuff with how he comps to things. And I don't know, it's interesting. I like it.
Yes, I would agree. I think that's like a really special aspect of Chris's musicianship. It's like he can bring things out of people and direct them and kind of knows what different musicians are looking for, and how to bring these things out of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've already alluded to Toronto, and I definitely want to hear more about that chapter of your career so far at some point today, because there's a lot I don't know about the time you spent there. And I'd love to hear about what that was like for you and how you reflect on it versus like what's going on now here. I think there's so much interesting stuff there. But even before that, I mean, we knew each other at CapU back in the day. I know almost nothing about you before you got to Cap. So what can you tell me about kind of your upbringing and en route to Cap? Because that's all a blank space for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was put into piano lessons when I was 5, and like a lot of kids. But I was really lucky in that we had a great piano teacher as our next door neighbor. And Mrs. Brown was her name, was ready to take on weekly lessons with a 5-year-old despite being a retired nurse.
Oh, wow.
She was a Royal Conservatory of Music certified piano instructor and was ready to do that at 6:30 a.m. every once a week, whatever day it was. And I loved playing piano right away. And I took it really seriously for a long time. Sometime around when I was entering high school, I started to get kind of disillusioned a bit with the Royal Conservatory process and everything like that. I was going for my grade 8. And while in that process, sort of started to phase piano lessons and that whole side of it out as I got more into band at school. I was playing trumpet, actually.
I did not know that.
in band at that time. And I was really bad. But I still had a great time playing piano in the jazz band. And the school I went to, Semiahmoo Secondary in South Surrey, took music and jazz in particular really seriously. So I was moving in that direction. And around 9th grade is when I started to get into saxophone. And for my 15th birthday, my mom gave me John Coltrane's A Love Supreme on CD. Yep. And I was obviously blown away by that. And I started to get into playing the saxophone more and listening to saxophone players and just jazz music in general. But I didn't really take it seriously as sort of a thing that I thought could be pursued, like really seriously as one's career, maybe.
Like what you're doing right now.
Exactly. I didn't think that was a thing anymore. I thought that was a 20th century thing. I thought it was done. And I was interested in it in just kind of a hobby sense. And that's great too, obviously. But what made me actually try to pursue it was we went to Music Fest Canada in Toronto, And I wound up getting a, just a first year tuition scholarship to Humber College
Mm-hmm.
From the performance there. And it sort of made me realize, like, oh, I can actually do this. And there are like schools that like educate people on this. So my band teacher had gone to Capilano, Dagan Low,
Mm-hmm.
and he had said great things about the program, and I wanted to stay in Vancouver. So I actually wound up auditioning there really late, in like late May or something. Um, and then yeah, wound up going there in the fall, and that's where I think in my third year is when you started, and that's when we met.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you and Chris started together.
Yes.
Did you know each other before?
No, we didn't.
Cool. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the first friends you made on the way in.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like first month. Yeah.
What do you remember the most? Doesn't have to be the fondest. It could be the most. But what do you remember about the very, very early months or year or time period when you showed up at CapU?
I remember being, I was just, like a lot of teenagers, young adults, struggling with my sense of self and self-confidence, identity, all these sorts of things. And I was also very new to my instrument and the music compared to even a lot of people starting that year. So there was definitely an inadequacy that I felt, and I was like, really intimidated by all these amazing musicians who were the profs there, and the upper year students who to me were like full adults, like professional musicians. Like they were sounding, they were all sounding so fantastic. Mealy Hong being one of them, Jeff Claridge being another. There were a lot of really terrific musicians there, who I again just saw as adults, and I shyness and intimidation is probably they're probably the two words I can describe that with best. They went away pretty quickly as the reality of the setting actually set in. I would say by the second semester there, I was more comfortable, and learning how to practice properly, learning all the things that you learn at music school, and getting to know the community. Yeah, it felt a lot more solid.
Yeah. Can you talk about either who your lessons teachers were, other influential teachers over the whole period? Like once you get into it, if you look back on it all, who are some of the most important teachers? Obviously, there's so many, so you don't have to name every single one, but if there's any in particular that really come to mind as important, kind of formative people, who would they be?
Well, on saxophone, for sure, Steve Caldestad and Chad Makala were my private lesson instructors, and they're both unbelievable musicians, and I learned so much from them. And I spent 3 years in Brad Turner's A band, and he's obviously an incredible musician. He was very influential. Bill Kuhn, Dave Robbins, and I would say like those are the ones who I got to spend the most time with, and so yeah, I think my instrument was the biggest thing. So I got to really shout out Steve Caldestad and Chad Makala for that, like taking the time to help me sort of learn the instrument and how to improvise and play as a jazz musician at the same time. Because I didn't have really much foundation on the saxophone coming in.
Yeah. Or you realize pretty quickly how much room there is to grow. And then you're at a certain age where it's like you can grow very fast once you realize that, I guess.
Yes. Yes. That was a huge part of it, realizing how far there was to go and just really how to do it. That's the big thing. Learning how to practice is kind of half of what you do in music school, right?
Yeah. What about going to see people play live? When did that become part of a picture for you in your development? When did you start going out to hear stuff in this community? What was that like?
That was in high school,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
actually. Yeah, I heard, Brad's quartet in high school. Um I heard triology.
Oh,
I
nice.
heard the Jody Prosnick quartet with at that time Steve um
Oh, yeah.
and Jesse Cahill and Tilden.
So this would be at Corey Weeds' cellar, probably.
Yeah, well, later once yeah, I think some of the shows were at the cellar, but I didn't really start going there often until I got to Cap.
Mm-hmm.
One was at the Bell Center in Surrey. Um, Brad, I heard outdoors somewhere.
Oh, nice.
I think must have been at the Jazzfest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Miles Black and Bill Kuhn in triology, of course. Just a yeah, it sort of makes you aware of like how many great musicians there actually are in this city to learn from and check out. Yeah.
That makes sense. Fair enough. Because I mean, if you're growing up in South Surrey or White Rock, like going to Corey Weeds' Jazz Cellar at Broadway and Alma is like going to another province. Like that's a long trek. So it doesn't surprise me that it wasn't a part of your regular. It even felt like a lot to go there from New West, and that's like twice as far.
Yeah. You're taking like 3 or 4 different transit vehicles to get there.
And back. Yeah.
Yep. And back. Yep.
So Jazzfest becomes more important that way, especially because of the downtown stuff. And then people are coming to White Rock, like the Bell Center, the what is now called the Surrey Schools Jazz Fest. That was a big thing that I was going to at that time. That was always hosted at that theater. And then there'd be some jazz in White Rock too, I guess, that you would have been relatively close to, it sounds like.
Yep. Yeah, there was always something going on at the Spirit of the Sea Festival and other little local White Rock jams like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Then maybe once you get a few years into Cap, then there's another dimension to stuff you're going out to see. Like maybe then you start to play some things, and also your friends, you start to become aware of your friends or those people who you said you looked up to, like, oh, these people are like basically adults. Like, I'm so glad you mentioned that in the context of like Millie and Eli, because when I had them on the show just recently, one of the big things that I just wanted them to know was, I was like, I want you guys to know like how many people looked up to you. Like me too. Like I felt exactly that same way about them.
Yeah.
Right?
and what's funny is that Eli was in my year too. But I looked up to him and still do. Like he came in with a lot of foundation on his instrument and a lot of knowledge, and he was already sounding so great right from first year. Yeah. So when Eli and I started playing together, later, like talking about later on in Cap, around our third year especially, we started playing together quite a lot, and we recorded a little EP of his tunes. It was that's one of the projects I look back on the most fondly from Cap, for sure. Eli taught me a lot. So yeah, it's kind of neat to like look up to someone so much who's in the same year,
Yeah.
But I was also going to listen to, again, I mean, Millie was becoming a top call drummer in town basically as soon as she left school, and whenever Jeff was in town from the Ships, he was doing his quartet gigs and just sounding incredible. Jeff Claridge.
Yeah.
And then like starting to do things myself was pretty big, because you know this as well as I do, as well as we all do. You never learn more quickly than when you're actually on the bandstand.
Yeah.
Especially with like, especially if you get the chance to play with pros who are years and years ahead of you, much better. Like, I love playing with people who are way better than me. It's so great. I still love doing that. One of my probably most formative gigs I can think of was when Chad Makela put together at the second, or maybe it was the third overall iteration of 1067, the DIY venue on Glen Drive, that they dubbed Glen 67. He put together a group with just one off for this gig with Eli and great guitarist Mike Agranovich and myself, Bernie Arai, and Millie.
Wow.
And it was...
So we got two drummers.
Yeah. It was a really cool gig. He just kind of called tunes that he liked, and we, or especially myself, hung on for dear life, and it was a great learning experience. And that plus doing lots of shows with the A band and other gigs out in town with bands formed of my friends from Cap, Matt Chaboter and Chris and Mealy, Eli, among others. That was when, as I think for many of us, that's when the learning really, really starts. When you can get to that point and start doing professional work.
Yeah. Matt Chaboter, that's a good pull. Throwing it out there. He has an After Dark in August.
Yes, he has an After Dark coming up. He's bringing Andrew Thompson back to town, who's a terrific drummer who was in my year. Another stellar musician I had the privilege of learning with and learning a lot from. Speaking of Queer as Funk, you mentioned Queer as Funk. That's the same night of that Commodore show with Queer as Funk. So I hope that I can
go
squeak over at some point and get over to Frankie's for that.
Oh, yeah. August 2nd.
Yeah, August 2nd.
Huh.
So
you have until, I would say, if you want to say hi at a minimum, you'll have until probably 12:30 at the very latest. 12:30 a.m. I think you're probably pretty safe. Obviously, if you want to hear music, you got to get there before midnight probably. But I think you probably got until 12:30 to walk over there. So I like your chances.
At the very least, I can say hi. I'd love if I could hear some music, though.
Yeah.
Matt's one of the most incredible musicians I've ever met. He's an amazing composer and improviser, and I just know this is going to be an incredible show. So I really do wish I could hear the whole thing. Yeah.
And yet, and there's still tickets available as of the time of recording for the Queer as Funk show. So
yes, that is kicking off Vancouver Pride.
Mm-hmm.
Queer as Funk is an incredibly exciting band. I don't think I've never experienced playing this kind of music in this way. It's so exciting, and I feel like I'm just getting pulled along by a train every time. It's fantastic. So if you haven't gotten to hear that group, go kick off Vancouver Pride at the Commodore with Queer as Funk. There are still some tickets available.
This is your how many times doing that show? Because I know they've done it previously.
This is my second. I just joined the band last year.
So last summer you did it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've also played a bunch of times, like we can talk about Jazzfest soon too, but like you've been playing with that band already several times, like in June, a whole bunch too.
Yes. Yeah. A ton of Pride events and other events like the Dragon Bow Festival and the Save the Wise fundraiser. That was really fun. And I hope that works. Seems to be working.
Yeah, it seems to be getting a lot of attention and a lot of good concerts and a lot of good times. So
yeah, beloved venue in East Van. Hope that it can stick around.
Yeah, and then there's also an album that you've made with Queer as Funk that has yet to be released, right?
It has been released.
It has been released.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was released at the Wise.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotta go listen.
in the late spring.
Yeah.
So not long ago. And yeah, it's a great it was kind of intended to be a way to show people what they're missing if they haven't been to a Queer as Funk show. And of course, this band is primarily a live band. Like, it's a show band first and foremost, but I think the record does a really great job of capturing that energy and showing people like, oh, you really should make your way out to wherever they're playing because you should experience this. It's quite something.
Okay, yeah, I look forward to checking that out. That's good to know. Thank you for checking me on that.
Of course.
So there's all these Jazzfest gigs too, but I also said we could talk about Toronto. And I was getting the sense that we were maybe, as we were kind of working our way chronologically through your time at CapU, we were maybe kind of getting to the period of time where you were starting to decide that you were going to go there, and then to the period of time that you were there before you came back here. Is that right? Were we kind of getting there a little bit? Maybe there's graduation en route to that, but what's happening there? Kind of how do you get from I'm at Cap through graduation to going to Toronto?
Well, it started to become kind of apparent to me that as well as things kind of were going here, it was I first wanted to become better and educate myself more. And I knew that I would be able to do that here, but I also wanted to take in a new scene and a new city and go do a master's degree. So, but I also knew I wanted to take some time off in between. So I went to Toronto basically right away after graduating, after, a handful of months, 6 months or something. And then I spent a year just like on the scene, figuring things out, going to jams. I went to the Rex jam every week. I went to the Net Studios jam every week. I went and sat in on as many gigs as I could with like Bernie Sinensky and Perry White and a bunch of other kind of Ryan Oliver, a bunch of other sort of veterans of the Toronto scene. Went and did as much as I could, and then I started the master's program at the University of Toronto. And during that time, I was starting to get more gigs and get more involved in the scene, and obviously through school, it's a great way to meet other musicians, and was able to sub in for some profs at times, or if they needed a sub on a particular thing, and their saxophone player couldn't come, and just get in on rehearsals and all that kind of stuff. And so I was able to absorb and learn a ton more than just at school while being in Toronto, and that was really exciting. And being in the program, I did, a lot of people ask me whether getting a master's degree is worth it as a jazz musician. And I can't really say that there's a universal answer for everyone, but I know for myself, especially having started jazz school with not that much foundation, I really wanted to do it. And I am pretty decent at being in school. So I knew that I was very likely to come out a better musician after that program. So that was my motivation for going into it, and it totally worked.
Nice.
Like, I'm definitely I left definitely a much better player than when I started. And I did wind up hanging around Toronto for like a year and a half more after graduating because I was just doing so many things, and I didn't want I was just loving being in the scene, and I didn't want to end that, even though I was missing Vancouver, missing home. Um, and then obviously, um, COVID hit,
And you were
and
there in
I was
Toronto.
I was in Toronto at that time when the pandemic hit. I had just kind of had an incredible year, actually. Of I really felt like my career was really starting. Like, it was really starting to take off. I was doing a lot of really great gigs and recording sessions and stuff like that. And then it hit, and Toronto was not a great place to be anymore once
Okay.
all the music and the arts and culture and all that stuff went away. Um, as as people who were born and bred there would attest to, it was just cold and sad. So it was a great push to finally make the move back, which I had been wanting to do, but had been putting off and putting off because things were going really well. Um, and then that basically brings us to where we are right now, because the lockdowns lasted a couple of years, and then once that was ending, the jams started happening in Vancouver again. I started getting out into this scene, and here we are now talking.
Did you feel like you were kind of a different person and that you kind of had to reintroduce yourself at that point? I mean, so much had shifted just in terms of the changes in the world, but did you feel a lot different at that point versus how you were feeling when you were still here before you went there at all?
Oh, I would say I was essentially a different person.
Yeah.
It's weird. Only maybe 5.5 years had passed, but yeah, I changed completely. As a person and musician, competence, confidence, all of it, yeah, completely shifted. So I did feel as if I was reintroducing myself in a lot of ways. Just as one of several examples, Mealy and Eli had moved to Montreal by that time,
Uh-huh.
and they were, you know, a huge part of my scene and who I played with a lot. And that's just an example of something that had changed. Um and yeah, I myself had changed a great deal. So yeah, to answer your question, I really did feel like I was reintroducing myself and getting to know a whole lot of new people, um, which I'm really grateful for. And I do feel as if this scene, a lot of people lament the old days, but having left in the mid tens and returned in the early 20s, I actually feel as if it is a even more vibrant scene than at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Not the quality of musicianship; it's all a lot of the same great musicians. Although there are new ones moving here and coming up out of school and stuff, but it's the vibrancy of the scene. I think it has gotten better.
I think we can say that that's a fact, that there's enough people on this show who have agreed with both of us on that. That I think that's pretty hard to argue with at this point.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That's not in my imagination there. That's corroborated. That's good. Yeah.
Oh, I would strongly suggest that has a lot of backers, that idea.
Yeah.
Not everybody, I suppose, but a lot of people would agree that things are very good now. I enjoy, and people enjoy telling the people who are younger than us that now is a good time,
Yeah.
in terms of when, if you could pick a time to be coming up, now is a pretty good one.
Yeah. And compared to the one other era that we know.
Yeah, because that's all we can say. We can't
all we
speak
can
for any
say.
other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, justifiably so, many of our elders would say, yeah, this is better than 5, 6, 7 years ago, but it's definitely not better than 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And they would be fair, and I'm sure it was. But I'm very grateful to be. I think it was good timing. I'm grateful to be back here when I am, and like you say, it's a better time here than when I left, I think.
Yeah. So here's an interesting point on the timeline.
Mhm.
One of the projects that you're in right now and that you played in during the Jazz Fest is Kevin Romain's Salience Network.
Yes.
And you're featured on the album,
Mhm.
and you played at this year's Jazz Fest with that band, also including Faye Vincadane on trumpet,
Mhm.
and it's Jeff Gammon on bass.
Mhm.
You played at Tyrant during the Jazz Fest, but that project started as a trio, and it was like a sax bass drums trio with you and Kevin and Jeff.
Yes.
And the first gig that I could just find easily by searching with that trio was actually at the 2021 Jazz Fest, which would be
Yes.
very, very soon after you came back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can you share about like that project, the beginning of it for you and that period of time? Because that sounds like an interesting spot right in the middle of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, well, basically, like, I don't know if it was like a month into getting back here or something. Chris Fraser asked me to do a session with Kevin and Chris, and I think it was Dan Howard playing bass on that session, and it was great. We had a great time playing. Kevin's rehearsal space is big enough that we could all kind of be in separate corners, and everyone who could masked up and all that, and we had a great time playing, and we did a couple more sessions after that in different configurations at that space. And then Kevin asked me to do a gig in like September or October of that year at Second Floor Gastown, which was doing like one of the few venues still doing gigs at that time. And shout out to David Sekula for keeping that going.
Yeah.
And it was a show of pretty much all Kevin's music that he had previously written for piano trio and wanted to do in sax trio with Jeff, and Kevin and Jeff have played together for a long time in various projects, including Only a Visitor, which contains another couple of my idols from the Cap days, Selena Kurtz and Emma Postel. They were in upper years, but I did get a chance or several chances to play with them, and I learned so much from them. And yeah, so that was their, I think, beginning of Kevin and Jeff playing together. And we did that Second Floor gig. And then by the time that Jazz Festival gig rolled around, I think that trio had already recorded like kind of an EP length of stuff at the Chan Center, which was really interesting. On the stage of the Chan Center we recorded. And also had done, I think, 3 other gigs before that at just sort of various things outdoors and not over the spring. But yeah, that Jazz Festival show at Frankie's was it was a really special gig. Like I remember it still. And I also I recall being kind of like flabbergasted that we were able to do it. I didn't think there would be a jazz festival. I was really glad there was,
because there hadn't been in 2020. Yeah.
And it was Yeah, it was, and it has been so great playing with those two, and now with Faven as well. Faven's an incredible musician, and yeah, that band is very special to me, um, because it's so musically fulfilling, and to be able to play in it during a time when not much music was happening was pretty fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm deep in this band right now because I mean, Chris wrote his kind of annual banger article about the All City Athletics show and the album release last year.
That's right.
I had Jeff on this show recently. You're
Mhm.
here now. Faven is next.
Oh,
you
great.
know, but not Kevin's not in the mix here though. So I guess I have to
What's going on
arrange
with that?
something with him
Yeah.
too, so that I can cover everybody, including the band leader there, and not just the other three musicians. But
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in the thick of the prominence of that band right now, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
There's a few other times I got to hear you during the Jazzfest though.
Mhm.
And speaking of playing with Faven, that's another one. So you played at
Yes.
Ocean Artworks at the Jazzfest, and it was the Faven Kidane Sextet. And you were on the front line with Faven and with my old friend Nebu Johannes.
Mhm.
And you had the rhythm section of Noah Franz Nolan on keys, Milo Johnson on bass, and from Edmonton, who has also been on the podcast here recently, Biboye Onanuga. So and then several guests at the end of the show joining you, which was a lot of fun.
Yes.
I caught the second set of
Mhm.
that show because I came along with many other people who filled the place even further than where it was at after Irreversible Entanglements got out at Performance Works.
Yes.
I came and I heard, I think, the last tune of your first set and then the second set. So tell me about that project, that gig.
Yeah, I mean that was a really special night as well. It was really cool to have Biboye there again. That was a great episode, by the way. I really enjoyed listening to you two
Thanks.
talk.
Yeah, he's cool.
He's a very cool guy.
He was great on the mic.
Yeah. And I mean the origin of that group, it was originally Quincy Mays on keys and Bella Federigo on bass.
It's for the Max Roach show.
For the Max Roach 100th birthday show that the VIF Center put on. And of course during Black History Month. So it was amid other, presentations of Black art and celebrations of Black excellence. And that was a really special show too. But getting back to the festival gig, it was really great to have Noah and Milo on it as well. Noah I've known for years. He was in, I think, third year at of his undergrad at U of T when I started there.
Yeah.
We played together a fair bit and I got to hear him a lot. He's a really special musician. And Milo I didn't meet until pretty recently, when I did a show of all his music at La Fabrique Saint Georges. His music for like strings and harp and saxophone and then drum kit and bass. And then recently, a little more recently, we did a quintet gig with Faven and Quincy and Todd Stewart on drums of a lot of the same music, but done for jazz quintet instead. So it was really cool. That night was pretty incredible. Our guests from Seattle and from Vancouver on vocals, all spectacular. And Cordelia on vibes and vocals was very cool. And there was something about that group that I was just like, I don't know if I'm gonna forget that show. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was pretty special. My mom came and visited She lives near Palm Springs in California,
Hmm.
and she came and visited for the festival. And that's one of the shows. She's heard Salience Network a number of times actually, but I was really glad that she got to hear that one. She's always asking about like what I'm doing, and she really wishes she could hear me, do live shows more often. And I'm really glad she got to be there for that one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was such a fun show. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the ones that I'll remember the most from this year's Jazzfest,
Mhm.
for sure. I also got to hear you play some 2-part horn stuff in an interesting group, the Cat Torrin John Corswood group, for the afternoon set at Ocean Artworks. A lot of people came out in the rain, not the pouring rain, but in the light rain to hear you that day. I got to hear, I guess, the first set of the two. You also played with that band at Tyrant a little while ago, and I understand that that's kind of a recent band. So how's that one going?
I love that group so much. As I've remarked before, it's pretty fantastic to be able to play in this kind of like, I don't know, you guess call it a stacked group with because rounding out the group is Andre Lachance on bass and Kevin on drums. And to play all this music by two just master composers who I've looked up to forever. John is a great example of someone who I listened to a ton when I was a student, back before I moved to Toronto, but never met or was involved with in any way, of course. But who I'm so grateful to have been able to work with so much since I got back. And I love his music and I love his playing, and he's such a great guy. And I can now say the same about Kat, who I've just before had always listened to when I was a student. Pugs and Crows won their Juno, and that was so cool. That was such a great record, and her stuff by herself is, she writes such beautiful music and is such a cool improviser and great keys player. And it's it's a privilege to be able to play in that group. And I think it basically started by Kat moving back from New York and her just being like, John, I want to play. Let's get together and play. Like, I've got all these tunes. I know you've got tunes. Let's play. So they actually, I think, just did a trio with Kevin at first, and then they brought Andre and myself on, and it's very new. I think they did one gig as a trio, and then we did that Tyrant gig as the quintet, and then this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard them. I forget who the bass player was. I heard Kat and John play at La Fabrique as part of this whole sequence at some point during this development. I don't think it was the same music though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
But I missed the Tyrant show, so that was my first time hearing the band. Andre on electric bass. That was like the day after I saw Kevin do the Salience Network show at Tyrant, so I got to hear you and him again. Got to hear John playing with you, all these crazy horn parts. It was pretty mellow music though, maybe. So it's interesting.
Which is kind of you might think off-brand for John. If you listen to a lot of Hard Rubber Orchestra.
Yeah.
Or the other large ensemble of his that I've been so fortunate to be able to play in, Absolute Unit, a newer group. He tends to go really big, and it's really cool to hear this other side of his composing.
Yeah. I'm gonna make a confession here, because my time in the scene is born from nothing in the summer of 2010. There's nothing before that. I didn't know anything. I'd never heard anybody. And then I had just kind of started going to Corey Weeds' Cellar a couple times, and then I get to CapU on a 2012-13, and then I start getting exposed to a little bit of different things, but then I'm still so like narrow until I get to the Rhythm Changes era kind of here too, and now I'm just trying to go out there and learn stuff. But so because my timeline starts there, I have never in my life listened to Pugs and Crows. I have never heard a single composition, song, anything.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
never listened to them, so I'm going to go and do that.
I think it was right around that time. I was a very early year student, I think, when that record came out.
I know I have to, and I know that I have not.
Yeah, I'd really recommend it. Cole Schmidt. Yeah, it's really, really beautiful.
It's like at this point, it's an essential band that you have to know to understand the scene and the way it has been over like the last 15 years, but I still need to go and listen to it. So
yeah.
Now, the other Jazz Fest gig that I wanted to ask you about was the Taras Luca sextet, right? With Dean and with Dan Howard and with percussion and drums with Liam McDonald and Jameson Coe. That was the lineup, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Incredible band.
How was that show? Ocean Artworks, daytime again. Better weather,
but there were some technical difficulties in that a power surge of some kind hit the entire island, and it fried the poor sound person's mixing board. I think completely destroyed. Chris is his name. He's a great sound tech. Completely, I think permanently destroyed the board, which is awful.
Whoa.
So that meant no sound for a little bit there.
How far into the gig were you when that happened? Set one, set two?
Partway through the second set.
Oh, so you had a full set one.
Yeah.
Okay.
There had been a full set already. Yeah. And what wound up happening was they just lugged a bunch of amps up and plugged what they could into that. I went with no amplification. And same with like the percussion, which is kind of difficult. But Jameson did a great job of just sort of keeping, like, playing exactly as he did, but at half volume, basically, or like 3/4, so everything could be heard. And so it actually turned out great. It was totally good. And that group, I think that's the third or fourth show with that relatively new group, but Taras is, I don't know if you've had much of a chance to hear him, but he's just a really great composer and improviser and just accordion player in general. Later this evening, actually, 6th of July, 2024, for anyone keeping track, Taras and Dean and myself will be playing some trio at the Music at the Shop in Burnaby. So that'll be fun, the barbershop. And we did one other trio show at the Frankie's After Dark set a few weeks ago. And I love Taras's music because it's really, even when it's not particularly lively and happy, it's still lively and happy and just so melodic and catchy. And I love getting to play music like that. And it's such a band that you can ride the wave of, that rhythm section of Dan and Jameson and Liam in particular, and then Taras and Dean kind of weave in between, sort of being more with me and being more with the rhythm section, and it's quite a band. And I think that show was especially that first set with the normal amplification and we were a little more dialed in. It was a great example of what that band is, which is really groovy and very entertaining.
Yeah. I mean, you'd played Guilt and Co. multiple times, right? Those are some of the other sextet gigs that you've done with him. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's Ocean Artworks, when everything's working, it's a better sonic environment for that band, I'm sure.
Yes, I would say so. Although it went over great at Guilt and Co. too. And at Tyrant Studios when that group played there. But that was with Kevin was subbing for Jameson on drums.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that tonight you're going to go do that. Tonight I'm going to hear Jameson play some music. Vez and I are heading off to Catalano to hear Madeline Reed's band, and Jameson's in that.
Oh, so, great.
Yeah, we're gonna hear several people right after this.
Excellent.
That's gonna be It's going to be fun. When I think of you playing at Guilt & Co., this is not Jazzfest related, but there's another band that I see pop up on the gig list that I haven't heard. It's called Meridian, that you also play in at Guilt & Co., right?
Yeah, and that band needs to expand more in that it needs to...
In terms of where it plays?
Yeah. We love Guilt & Co. Obviously, Guilt & Co. is a great venue. We love playing there. But it needs to get out there more. I think Meridian is plagued by there being no real leader and everyone in the band being unbelievably busy.
Mm-hmm.
And
what does it sound like? What is it like?
It's funk fusion, like jazz funk fusion, 100%. Really just fully in that camp, driven by the grooves of Colin Sankey on the electric bass and Trent Otter.
I mean, if you're talking about funk fusion, like you could not have a better bass player and a drummer from this scene.
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. They're fantastic. And it's and this is the problem, is that we all love playing in that band so much, but again, we're all just doing so many things that, and none of us is good at booking our own stuff. Colin has his own project that he books, but he's kind of preoccupied with that. And the rest of us aren't good at like getting our stuff together to book the band in other spaces. But it's a great group. And I really do hope that it plays elsewhere someday.
Yeah, you're all such great side people, and so much of your time is spent doing that. It's like, how are you actually going to find the time to put on your leader hats with that band? That's an interesting challenge.
I think I'm going to have to take it up. This is my push to do that. Yeah.
I'm sure that would be great.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Max Roach show.
Yes.
We're about halfway through 2024 right now, of course, because we're talking in early July. And in my opinion, you've been on both of the greatest standalone gigs of the year, non-Jazzfest, which would be that one, and the Dean Thiessen Stranger Friends Orchestra.
Oh, yeah. That's another show I don't think I'll ever forget.
Same, yeah.
I'm not the first, nor will I be the last to say that Dean Thiessen is a very, very special person and part of this scene. A very special musician and composer. Stranger Friends Orchestra is another group that, I feel so privileged to be a part of. We have no shortage of amazing composers in this city. And Dean is right at the top of that list of music that I'm always so excited to learn. When he writes something new, I'm so excited to practice it. and he's such a creative orchestrator. I'm always excited to find out who this little melody is going to be played with. Like, is it going to be with guitar? Is it going to be with trumpet too? Like, it's an adventure listening to the group as you play with it as well. And Dean's spirit at the helm of it, because he doesn't play piano in his group. Stewin Park plays piano so beautifully in the group. So to have Dean at the front conducting, that show at the Fox Cabaret was, really quite special. Like I kind of well up when I think about it. Really, it's one of the shows that I have a very strong emotional connection to.
Yeah. I've never had a chance to deliver it as a full-on sentence. I've written about this a couple times, but I'm gonna say it again here for the people in the back. In my opinion, and I'm guessing a lot of other people's opinions, Dean is our generation's Hugh Fraser, 100%, and his band is our veggie.
Yes,
it absolutely is.
I could not agree more with that. That's a great way to put it. And it really captures the spirit of veggie in that, from what I understand, Hugh, for anyone not familiar with Hugh Fraser, and I really unfortunately never got to meet him. I went to CYMC one year, but he was not on faculty that year.
That's the Courtney Youth
The
Music
Courtney
Camp on
Youth
Vancouver Island.
Music Camp on Vancouver Island, exactly. He had started to get sick by that point, sadly, and he wasn't there. But I'd heard from older students just how incredible he was as like a theory teacher and big band leader as well. And obviously an incredible musician and composer, which I'd always got to hear on records and even at some live shows, fortunately. But from what I understand, how he approached his group it was really about, sort of Duke Ellington style. It was about the players, and he really wrote for the different players in his band and really wanted to showcase them in different ways. And the music wound up taking shape based on what he knew his players could do and what would sound the best because of them. And I think Dean does that too. Like, Dean really takes that approach, and he inspires all of us to be better people and musicians just by example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I never got to. I saw Hugh Fraser ensembles several times. Fortunately, I never really got to talk to him though. So obviously, his influence looms large, and Dean's does too. So there you go.
Very much so. Yeah, I would agree with that comparison for sure.
Yeah. One more, Itamar Era's band. You mentioned you have a connection with your family to like the US and stuff, right? And I think you told me once before that you're a double citizen or something like that.
I became a dual citizen just before COVID hit. Yeah.
Oh, just recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that came up because I heard that you were going to go play with Itamar in the States or something.
Yeah. There's a show in Bellingham that we're doing in September amid Nelson, Edmonton. We did Trail last fall. Itamar's taking us around.
Yeah.
And yeah, yet another unbelievable composer and musician we have here in the city. I think a lot of us would agree that we're very lucky to have Itamar around. He's such an inspiring person and musician, and I wish he were around more and he got to, play his music even more often. There are so many musicians we could say that about. I got to start playing with Itamar last year, a little over a year ago, I guess it was. And yeah, I don't know if I've learned more in a shorter space of time than learning Itamar's incredibly challenging and deep, beautiful music, and just listening to him play it, even just listening to him, play a monk tune and whatever. I feel like I'm just like getting a class every time. It's pretty unbelievable. I'm very grateful to be able to work with him.
That's so awesome. Everybody I talk to who plays with him, they all make sure to say how hard his music is.
It's impossible to forget. You can't not mention that. It's so challenging, but challenging in the way that when you get it, and you've learned and grown as a musician, and the result is unbelievable.
Yeah, and a lot of the people we've talked about also play with him, right? You got Dan Howard sometimes in there. Sometimes it's Jeff Gammon. So, Kevin probably sometimes, I think, also. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kevin lots. Kevin's been Itamar's main drummer for like 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, we all, consider it going to Itamar school.
School, yeah.
We all go to school with Itamar. Yeah, he's another really special person and musician.
So I know I said one more, but I have one more once, as they say, as Count Basie would say, apropos a big band, like we were talking about Dean's big band. And I haven't heard this band do the Big Band Mondays at Frankie's thing, but the Christopher Berner Jazz Orchestra, you've played there with them, maybe a couple other places. Let's talk about that band too.
Yeah. So, Chris is definitely a composer to watch and someone who I'm really glad to get the chance to discuss, because he's a little bit more of like an up and comer, but he's a full-fledged big band arranger and composer in his own right, and he's kind of one of those people who doesn't give himself enough credit. So, there was a show at the Brentwood Presbyterian Church. There was one at the St. Andrews Wesley Jazz Vespers, and then two at Frankie's.
I heard the band at Brentwood. That's the one time I've heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. I would, just say I'm sure there will be another Frankie's Monday at some point soon. And yeah, for anyone who hasn't gotten a chance to hear Chris Berner's music and his big band play it, he's a really incredible and imaginative big band composer. It's kind of that music that on the surface you hear it and it's so swinging and it sounds like right out of the Boss Brass, or there are some things that sound really Maria Schneider-esque, and
sure.
Like you hear influences from the Darcy James Argue Secret Society, kind of all the big, the kind of the modern big bands, but he really has his own voice too, which you can really hear in there. And he's also a really creative orchestrator in that I kind of feel like, my parts, I'm always kind of with someone new numerous times throughout any given piece. And much like Dean's orchestra, the band is, as you might say, stacked. Jeff Claridge in there, Tristan Martinussen on the other tenor chair, brilliant soloist. Brad Turner on a lot of trumpet solos, I'm always sitting right behind Casey Thomas Burns on trombone. We have a lot of parts together. He always sounds amazing. Duran Ritz on drums. It's just like too many to list. Always a great group and one I'd really recommend checking out.
Yeah. Two things I love about that I think are super cool is, one, there's not even that much overlap between like the members of that band and Dean's band. So like that's pretty incredible, like the total number of musicians, right?
It just goes to show how deep the scene can really go.
Yeah.
And I think there's small overlap between that group and then Dean's, and then also Casey's big band, the Leading Ladies. The little big band. In that Sophia Avellino, who plays baritone sax in Chris's band a lot, also plays with Leading Ladies a lot,
and was on the gig at the Fox with Dean.
And
all three.
And is in she's the trifecta. She's
very sax
Stranger
behavior.
Friends too. Yeah, like big Barry sax energy there. Yeah.
And the other thing was just that like it's so cool that you're channeling the voices of like all these different composers, right? Like obviously it's not just you in the big band, there's so many people, but like your voice on the saxophone is becoming such a big part of like so many different composers' voices and how they present their music.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to be able to do that.
Yeah, totally. As we kind of come full circle here, I've seen it come up a couple of times on the gig list, maybe, or a couple of times over the years. You as a leader, your name on the gig. You don't have much time for that, I know, because you teach lessons, you play with all these wonderful people that we've talked about, right?
Yes.
How are you feeling right now, and maybe with a look ahead to the future about where playing as a leader sits for you?
It's something I've always struggled with. And I recall really at the front of my mind talking to Kelly Jefferson,
Oh yeah.
top Toronto saxophone player. When we were taking lessons, when I was taking lessons with him at U of T, I remember asking him about that because he's another person
Oh,
who
that's
I
a good
think
point.
more recently he's been playing as a leader,
He
which is
dropped an album
fantastic. He
this
dropped an
year.
incredible album. Um, and he played a lot of that material at the Toronto Jazz Festival this year. I think he's doing more stuff as a leader with his quartet of two former Vancouverites, Amanda Tossoff and
Yeah.
Morgan Childs.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, uh, really at that time, especially, this is in the couple years before COVID, Kelly wasn't playing that much as a leader. And, I remember asking him about it, and he said kind of the same thing. He's like, I'm so engrossed playing a bunch of other people's music because he's like one of the busiest saxophone players in the country. Um, and he puts so much, and it was really inspiring hearing him talk about it and hearing him play all these other people's music. He puts such great care and effort into it that it's almost like it were his own. He delivers these melodies and improvises on the tunes in a way that it's like he wrote them.
Mm.
And he really brings every group he's in to life. And I've tried to approach being a side player with that same intent. But he said kind of the same thing, that he's so wrapped up in other people's music that he forgets about his own and about being a band leader. And I'm really glad to see that that's changing a bit for him. And I hope that, I've got a book of tunes, and I've been talking with folks about recording and making that happen, and trying to make some shows happen too. So I can say with a mid-level of confidence that in the next year you will be hearing a lot more John Nicholson branded music.
That's very exciting. And I think that I could, or you listening to this, if you've heard any of John's music, or if you're familiar with all the names that have come up here, I think we can all kind of paint an interesting picture in our heads of what we might expect to hear from you with your association with all these other great mentors you've had and the people you play with. Now, we may be right or wrong, but you certainly leave a strong impression of the kind of caliber of this project. So I would be very excited to hear that when the time is right.
I hope that I can follow through on that. I think that's the other thing too, is right. Like, you talk about all the people I'm currently and have in the past played with and learned from. And you, like, having been involved with such great music and great musicians, you don't want to do something unless it can really match that, like what you've done, like match or just kind of shoot for the moon. But yes, again, I can say with a degree of certainty you'll be hearing a lot more.
That's great news. Is there anything else on your mind that you've been up to, or any other people in particular that you feel like you want to shout out or mention that we haven't already talked about yet?
Nope, we kind of said it all.
I'm leaving that in, by the way. I'm leaving that pause in. That's awesome.
Yeah, I just, the gamut ran through my mind there. Faven, Chris, I'll just point out something I'm not personally involved in, but a project I'm really looking forward to hearing coming up is Thad Bailey is.
Oh man.
I think gonna be for those unfamiliar, Thad Bailey, my local trumpet virtuoso, is gonna be doing some stuff coming up. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I got to hear Thad at the festival, one of the few shows I actually got out to listen to amidst my own busyness. Thad and Chris Fraser and Dan Howard played trio at Second Floor Gastown. Such a great show. I love all those three, and hearing Thad play is always such a treat. And that's just a fun little shout out. Nothing to do with me, but
Yeah. I'm going to make it more specific because I already have my tickets to it at Frankie's. It's on August 22nd. It's like one of the great bands of our generation. It's published. It's out there.
Okay, I'm glad. I'd forgotten the date, so I'm glad to hear that.
It's with Thad and David Blake back in town, and Eli and Millie. So not to be missed.
Yeah, assembling a little all-star crew there.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can get out to it,
that'll be one of the big ones.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I had so much fun talking with you about all these different things, this crazy last 30 days that you've had and like the history behind it.
Yeah, well, really cool. Thank you, Will. It's been a pleasure to talk with you about it as well.
Thank you for joining me.
Of course.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. If you enjoyed it, become a member for free today at rhythmchanges.ca. Get the free weekly email with artists, events, recordings from our scene. There's a bit of summer break coming up, but that's every Tuesday morning. You will get that. Rhythm Changes is a Chernoff music production. This episode was hosted and produced by me, edited and mixed by Justin Gorey. And I will catch you a few more times across the summer here as we head to a big episode. Thank you.